It's Wednesday, August 16th, 2017, and this is Seaside Chats with Kenneth Arthur, and I'm here with Luke McDonough to talk about the Minnesota Vikings. I had said last week on the podcast that my plan this season is to bring on fans of the opponent of the Seahawks for that week. These fans typically will be in the world of comedy, improv, entertainment, acting, and whatnot. You know, you get the idea. And this week we've got Luke McDonough, who is an actor and improviser in Los Angeles and a fan of the Minnesota Vikings, who the Seahawks take on this Friday in Seattle, their preseason home debut of the year. The Vikings and Seahawks have a very interesting history, especially, recent history, interesting connections that go back, you could say to Pete Carroll's days as a coach for the Vikings in the 80s, where he sort of made his mark as one of the best defensive backs and secondary coaches in the NFL, to the work he's done with the Seahawks since 2010, of course, all the way up to the Steve Hutchinson poison pill, and the Seahawks and the Vikings having, switching off other players like Percy Harvin and Sidney Rice and so on that have sort of gone back and forth. And so we're going to talk to Luke about, the state of Minnesota, the city of Minneapolis, the team of the Vikings, the sports that go around in that nice little Midwestern town to the Midwest. So, Luke, how are you today?
Good. How are you?
Very good. Very good. Thanks for coming on the show to talk Minnesota and talk the Vikings.
Yeah, having me.
Yeah, so just to get an idea of where your fandom began up until today, can you tell me a little bit about where you were born, like maybe even if it was in Minneapolis, a more specific area, and what you remember about growing up sort of in the realm of the Vikings?
All right. Well, I was born in Minneapolis. I lived in Woodbury, which is a suburb outside of the Twin Cities. And I moved to Minneapolis later in my life, but I was a Vikings fan my whole life because my dad was originally a Vikings fan, so obviously that was passed down to me. And I'm like all about hometown stuff. So being in here, like in LA, I live in LA now, I would never be a fan of any LA team because that's not where I'm from. But yeah, I've always been a Vikings fan, Timberwolves fan, Twins fan, Wild fan, and I like my dad. I remember going to church and always having to leave early because my dad needed to see the Vikings game, the kickoff. Or, but I also one thing that I do like, I liked a lot better about being in Minnesota watching football than being in LA is that it's on at a later time. Like here, it's very hard for me to watch football games because they start at 10 and I don't wake up that early. So I kind of have to force myself to watch the games now. Still a huge Vikings fan, but I don't pay attention quite as much as I did as when I lived in Minnesota or even the past couple of years, but still a huge fan.
Can you remember a year or a team or a quarterback or a coach or something like that where when you were young, this was your first favorite?
Oh, I mean, Randy Moss being on the team. That was where it all, I played football 6th and 7th grade and I just wanted to be a receiver because of Randy Moss. So did everybody else. But that was definitely like Randy Moss, Chris Carter. We were big fans of them. I always bring up Leroy Horde. He was my favorite running back at the time. I think like bad stuff came out about him being a bad guy later on, so that sucks. But yeah, those guys made me a huge fan. I don't think I've ever been to a Vikings game to watch the Vikings game, but I used to work at them. I prefer watching football by myself, like in a room by myself. I never liked like going to parties like where they're watching football. I felt like luck, but I just wanted to pay attention. So I'm still that way. And I would go to the Viking when I worked for the Metrodome. It was the Metrodome at the time. I worked over there getting people to sign up for credit cards. I'm sure you see them when you're walking around the stadiums, signing up for like Chase, MasterCard, Visa, whatever it is. And we give people free blankets or free T-shirts to get them to do that.
Have you ever, what sort of memories do you have of going, have you been to any football game, NFL game?
Well, actually, you know what? The last game I went to was it was a Vikings game maybe 2 years ago. It was against the Bears. I think it was their last game. It was the end of December, and it was before the new stadium, the U.S. Bank Stadium, was built. It was like almost finished, getting ready for the next season. And it was at the Gophers, Minnesota Gophers college football team.
Yeah.
It was at their stadium, and this was in the middle of winter in Minnesota, so it was freezing. It was like one of the coldest outdoor games the Vikings have ever played. And I was with my dad, and it was like a good father-son bonding moment for us. We were like freezing on the steel bleachers because we were in like the student section. I got the tickets kind of late. It was his Christmas present from me. But they like inside the stadium, there's no area for you to be. There's like no heating at all, like even in the inside. So the only place that was really warm was the bathroom. So it was like crowds in the bathroom. But yeah, that was a good experience, but also something I would never do again. Luckily,
Yeah.
the new stadium.
And for anyone listening out there, like myself, who's not familiar with Leroy Horde, I don't think there's anything like, I haven't found anything bad about him, but I do. If anyone wants to check out, I see here like on twincities.com that he was fighting off health problems recently, but Leroy Horde, Hoard, interesting guy and a Pro Bowler in 1994 with the Cleveland Browns, finishing out his career with the Minnesota Vikings. Are you a Minnesota Gophers fan?
I paid more attention to the hockey team because I played hockey my whole life.
Yeah.
But I've been to the games. Those were always fun because that stadium's relative too. So going to the college games was really fun. We snuck in to the first one, which they were playing against. I can't remember who they were playing against, but we snuck in. Tickets were like $300 because it was their first game at that stadium, and it was packed. But found a way to sneak in through the gift shop and had a good old time. Got really drunk.
Yeah, I remember one time a documentarian once exited through the gift shop, but that's another tale. What are some of your, like, for anyone like that's listening to this, maybe one day they'll find themselves in Minnesota or Minneapolis. Myself, I've never been to Minneapolis, but both sides of my parents, both of my sides of my family are from Minneapolis. I've never been there, but both of them didn't know each other there. When they were very young, their families moved out to Seattle, and I've not gone back. When my mom goes back sometimes, my grandma, who has since passed, but she had a very thick, like, oh, you betcha, very much a Minnesotan. What are some of your favorite things that you would like to do when you're in Minneapolis, whether it's like your favorite places to eat or favorite things to do? Paint me a little picture of what it's like besides what I imagine, which is just snow all day, every day.
Well, the snow, because I go back every Christmas. Going back over Christmas I feel like I have to, just because the snow is a part of Christmas. So being out in LA and not having that snow is bizarre, and I don't like it. So that's like a very romantic, experience that I have to hold on to. So I always go back, and to see the family is obviously great as well. But yeah, it's cold. It's definitely cold, and that February and January are by far the worst times of the year. But if you're in Minneapolis, one thing that you'll notice is there's a lot of skyways, which are the little indoor bridges from building to building across every street. So you never actually, like when I knew a girl that lived downtown when I was going to college at the Art Institute, which was also downtown. She worked at a bar nearby, and she lived at an apartment nearby, and she never actually had to leave. She had never had to go outside because of the skyways, which is insane. Like it was basically like she was like in a little gerbil or hamster maze. But so that's something I never really, like, if you're living downtown, you never really have to experience it, which is also, like they say, a bad thing, because putting people up on the skyways is not allowing them to be on the streets, which shows kind of like a bad street presence in terms of like ability in the city. So if people go there in the winter, they feel like the city's empty because everybody's inside walking indoors. So you don't like notice any of the people until you look up. But so that makes it a little strange. But it's on the Mississippi River and has beautiful bridges. That the 35W bridge collapsed when I was actually doing the credit card thing. I think that was at a Twins game, though. I don't know if you've heard about that, the 35W bridge collapse.
I've heard of it, but you know, it's interesting because some of these accidents that happen at stadiums or whatever, they sort of almost don't get a bunch of coverage, and they sort of fall through.
Yeah.
Pardon the pun. That didn't unintentional, but you know, just sort of fall away, and you don't hear about them.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't like a huge. It was obviously a tragedy because plenty of people didn't make it, but that was an interesting time because I was at the Metrodome. The bridge is like very nearby, and I just remember having to call my family to tell them I was okay, and no one could call anybody because there's so many people trying to call at that time. So that was like the first experience I had with like a big. I don't know, disaster that people freaking out over.
Yeah.
But yeah, I ended up living very close to there. Right now, there's an awesome bridge that's lit up underneath it. They built it super fast because the president came out and like forced them to build it as soon as they could so they could check all the other bridges that were aging. And like they came up, it was that. That's one thing, like Minneapolis, going to Minneapolis, you notice the bridges for sure.
One of the favorite segments that we've had in the show in the past, before it was this format, was a reel in the film goals discussion between myself and the co-host who had to leave for the ringer. But I've got a new idea, Luke, which is I've got a list of movies that were set in Minnesota, and I can tell you the movie, and you can just give me your quick thoughts, whether or not you've seen it or not, and we'll see where that takes us. What do you say?
That sounds great.
Now, I'm not sure if you've seen some of these movies. I know I'm a little bit older than you, but we'll find out. One of the movies that influenced me a lot as a fat kid was this movie called Angus. Do you know about it?
I do not. I've never heard about it.
It's just a poor young boy who didn't feel confident in his looks and tried to ask out a pretty girl to a dance. I recommend it for anyone out there. It'll get you through some. Well, actually, I don't know. I don't know if it got me through anything. Maybe it only made me feel worse. But check that one out. Now, this one I know you know about because you love hockey. It's the Mighty Ducks,
oh, yeah.
D2 the Mighty Ducks, and D3 the Mighty Ducks, all in Minnesota. And D2, box office #1 film in the U.S. at the time. What are your thoughts on the Ducks?
Well, the D2 was actually probably my least favorite because it was more in Los Angeles than anything. Mm-hmm. But, I was a huge Ducks fan. They filmed in some of the arenas that I skated in, so that was always fun. Mickey's Diner was in St. Paul. I've always, we ate there a lot. And it's always a fun experience to see things that are around. I think that's the first time where watching the film and being like, movies aren't real, because they'd be at the Mall of America and then they'd skate through through Minneapolis and in places that weren't near each other at all, because the Mall of America is in Bloomington, so it's a little bit of a ways. But yeah, that was fun being a little kid, seeing them skate around the cities.
What about The Good Son starring Macaulay Culkin?
I've heard of it. I haven't seen it. I didn't know it was based in Minneapolis either. 1993.
It's got yourself some Elijah Wood, some Macaulay Culkin. Very creepy. Check it out.
Right.
A famous movie that I'm sure you've seen, but it specifically in the title, it would think it's not in Minnesota. Fargo.
Fargo. Yes, I've seen Fargo. Fargo's great. Actually, I would say I don't think I've seen all of it, unless I was I don't think I've seen the whole movie, but I know the whole story, and I think they do end up in Minneapolis for a little bit there.
Now, this one's a surprising one because I didn't have any idea of where it was set, and most of it is set in the mind of a precocious young girl, Inside Out.
Oh yeah, they're from Minnesota,
Yeah.
right? And then they move to like San Francisco or something.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, that was great. That's a great movie.
It's a great movie. Pixar, you're doing it right. Now, this one is interesting because it's a couple movies from the same writer, but Juno 2007, also Jennifer's Body 2009,
Oh
both
yeah.
movies written by Diablo Cody. Any thoughts there?
I never saw Jennifer's Body, but Juno was a great movie. Those were like both based in southern Minnesota, I think. Um, but yeah, those were solid flicks.
Another sports movie from Minnesota, Major League Back to the Minors. Now they send these Major League guys back to the minors. The plot per Wikipedia is Roger Dorn is now the owner of the Minnesota Twins, which when you really think about it, the Minnesota Twins, not only now are they involved with Major League Back to the Minors, but these Twinkies were also a part of the movie Little Big League.
Yeah.
And I want to say Rookie of the Year. No, that was the Cubs, I think. Little Big League and Major League Back to the Minors, and I think a couple more. Any thoughts there?
Um. Yeah. There was. I can't remember. Maybe it wasn't even supposed to be based in Minneapolis. There was definitely a. I remember my mom or dad went to the Metrodome to like be extras basically in one of the baseball movies.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I can't remember what movie I just saw where maybe it was what's the Brad Pitt one with Jonah Hill?
Moneyball.
I think there's a scene in that where like they lose a game because someone from the Twins catches a ball. That's my most recent memory.
Yeah, and there's also, a famous playoff baseball scene, I think in Little Big League, where the big cameos in that movie were Ken Griffey Jr., Randy Johnson, and Lou Piniella, because they were like playing a one-game series against the Mariners.
Oh,
And no, that was Rookie of the Year because that's the one where he did the hidden ball trick because his arm went out.
oh yeah, Rookie of the Year is where he messes up his arm and then he can throw really fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, that dude like had some good movies. Like when I was little, I really liked. There's maybe I'm complete. Like if I saw him now, they'd probably suck. But
Yeah.
he was in like a Knights one where he was like went back in time, which I remember being like, oh, this is a great movie. I don't know if it is.
He then ended up with a minor role in American Pie, which
Oh yeah, that's him, huh?
yeah.
Yeah,
Hey, even if he doesn't have a career now, I think that's pretty good. He came
yeah.
out with a couple big movies as a kid.
Uh-huh. It's good. Better than what I'm doing, right?
Hey, we're all trying out there. Taking it back to the Minnesota Vikings, let's move up to maybe some of the more recent years. What have you been like following in terms of Teddy Bridgewater, Sam Bradford, head coach Mike Zimmer, some of the players out there? The Vikings, they haven't won a playoff game since 2009. They've been to playoffs 2 of the last 5 years, both times losing in the wild card round. Teddy Bridgewater at the big accident, so they trade, or big injury, freak injury, and so they trade for Sam Bradford. They would go 8-8, but they started off like I think 5-0, and so then they fell off after that, trying to get themselves together. How much have you been following, and like what are your general feelings about the state of the team right now?
Like I said, right now, I mean, like I know that Cook's going to be. It's looking like Cook's going to be the new guy for running back.
Yeah.
Um, Peterson, him leaving, he was kind of done the past 2 years anyway, so whatever. But last year, them winning the first 5 games, being a Minnesota sports fan, like I don't know if maybe every fan feels this, but like in terms of what the team was, I knew that streak wasn't going to last, and I felt like 5 games winning them in a row was just like super bad luck. Like I didn't like it happening because it was just like this can't sustain. Like this is we're gonna be horrible if this continues. And obviously it stopped, and we only won 3 games after that.
Yeah.
But Bradford, that was crazy. That was a crazy move. I really like Teddy, so I'm glad to hear that he's like getting better, and sounds like possibly he's going to be playing. I don't know if I've What is it? Is there any news on that?
I haven't heard anything super like in the realm of him getting closer to playing, but maybe I also haven't followed the Vikings every day, so
Yeah. I mean, I know that he's been at training camp. I'm not sure how, like, if he's like practicing a lot, or I think he's getting on the field a little bit, just probably jogging around. That was such a crazy time, him getting hurt right away.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really like him. Bradford's got a stronger arm. Teddy.
Did you ever deal with serious injuries, surgeries?
Surgeries in terms of like hurting something.
Yeah.
Right now, like I've never had surgery. I've had to go through physical therapy for my shoulder and my back because a buddy jumped on me on New Year's. So it wasn't for a sport event. I did actually cut my hand with a scissors. The scissors went through my hand like really deep, and right before I played a hockey game because I was cutting off the tape on my stick. And I was in the car with my dad, and he told me not to cut the tape the way I was holding it, and then the scissors slipped and went into my skin, and I was crying like crazy, but I still played the game. And then we went and cut down a tree because it was around Christmas time. I think it was like around Thanksgiving or something, a little after Thanksgiving. And then I went to the hospital to get stitches. So it was probably not the best order to do all of that in, but I always liked getting stitches. So that was a cool story.
You always liked getting stitches.
Yeah, it made you seem like you were, it was cool. Like you had a little story to tell.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. I've got some stitches on my finger from when I was like maybe 2 or 3 years old. They still hold up as far as
hold up. They're still on there.
I mean, like, yeah, it's still bleeding, and it's been 30 years. So
that's a great stitch job by that doctor.
Yeah.
But like Zimmer I like a lot more than Childress. He was something else. That year, the last year, that whole thing was crazy. Getting Favre was very fun. I was excited about that. And
yeah.
You're like having him and then getting Randy Moss back. That was another thing. That's another thing about Minnesota. Like they love nostalgia and bringing back, Kevin Garnett came back from the Nets, and then Torrey Hunter was back on the Twins. And it's just like and people freak out over it. Like they really want it. But I was freaking over Randy Moss being back, and I was really mad that Childress wasn't giving him the opportunities that he should have had.
Yeah.
But then, like, getting Donovan McNabb after that, like, it's such a crazy – like, Vikings were on the headlines of ESPN every single day. So that was fun to see, but it was not good things all the time, so –
yeah. Why don't here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say a name of someone associated with the Vikings, and you can give me your quick thoughts on that person.
All right.
Leslie Frazier.
Leslie Frazier. That was the coach after Childress, right?
Yeah.
I liked him better than Childress.
That's fair. What about Mike Tice?
Mike Tice. That was the coach. That was a coach.
Head coach 2002 to 2005.
Was he? Yeah, that was. I liked him better than Green, I guess. I felt like maybe I was just like a little kid seeing Green yell at the players, so that was always.
Yeah.
I don't know, but Tice was good. I mean, he got us. We weren't doing too bad with him, What was
Dante Culpepper?
Culpepper. I liked Culpepper. He was a good quarterback. He was nothing like amazing because I was paying attention too much to Randy Moss.
Yeah.
Those years, like the people I can remember the most are Chris Carter, Randy Moss, and Gary Anderson missing the field goal against the Falcons, I believe. Like that's because he like didn't miss a field goal once that year, and this was to get into the Super Bowl, and that was just heartbreaking. He missed his opportunity. He was the best kicker in the league at that time, and he choked. So everyone in Minnesota remembers Gary Anderson.
Do you remember running back? Because this is, a famous name to the Seahawks now, but there was another player with the same name who made the Pro Bowl in 2002, Michael Bennett.
I remember the name. When did he play?
Michael Bennett was with the Vikings from 2001 to 2005, making the Pro Bowl in 2002 when he rushed for almost 1,300 yards and 5.1 yards per carry, but that was his only really good year.
Yeah, I remember Bennett's name, but again, during that time, it was more receivers that I was all about. Peterson got me into the running. Like, his first year was insane. His, first game, he ran almost 300 yards.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing that we'll get into here in a bit too. But as far as, I don't know if other people have a bunch of memories of playing video games, but I especially like playing games by yourself, such as NFL 2K. And I remember having, I think NFL 2K or something like that on Sega Dreamcast back in around the year 99, 2000. And playing in the Super Bowl, this fake Super Bowl against the computer. And I was the Vikings, and I threw a touchdown pass to win the Super Bowl at the last second to Jim Kleinsasser.
Nice. And you won?
And I won the Super Bowl with that thing, and I always had a soft spot for Jim Kleinsasser, who played from 99 to 2011, all with Minnesota. Any thoughts on him?
Kleinsasser, I mean, yeah, I remember the name, but I'm I didn't know every player on the team, but that's great, man. I'm glad you won that game.
That's all I'm looking for. Nobody's ever really patted me on the back for it.
I never played the newer games, and I think the reason I don't know as many players' names is because I don't do fantasy football.
Yeah.
The reason I don't do fantasy football is because I like only rooting for my team. So having another player from a different team playing my team, and that player's someone I'm supposed to be rooting for, just bothers me. So I refuse to do fantasy football.
Yeah. I don't do fantasy football either because I think it's a waste of time and sort of ruins the game because, yeah, exactly. You should be rooting for – I just think I would much rather be focusing on the game and not who scored the touchdown or
exactly
those kinds of things.
It's a waste of time. You're too busy playing video games.
Exactly. Guys, I got to play my Dreamcast, man. You will, even the nice people in Minnesota would have to disown you if you didn't know the name Kevin Williams.
Kevin Williams passed away, right? No.
No, it's his birthday today, actually, as I'm looking at his page.
He's a offensive lineman, right?
Defensive tackle, 5-time All-Pro, 6-time Pro Bowler.
Kevin Williams. Okay, who else am I thinking of? Kevin Williams.
Maybe Kevin Williamson, the writer of Scream.
Let's see. Who else was there? Was another guy that would play with Kevin Williams all the time.
Yeah.
Who was on the team at the same time? Those two were great.
Right. It was a duo. Kevin Williams, and there was another guy on the team who also played the defensive line. Chris Hoban?
Maybe.
Pat Williams.
Yeah, it was were they brothers?
No, I mean, I'm sure they were, close teammates, brothers in that sense.
Henderson and Aaron Henderson.
Yeah.
That was disgusting when EJ broke his leg.
Oh, right. And that's the other thing that we haven't really got into. The Minnesota Vikings, there's certain teams that have almost a running theme of and things that you wouldn't want to happen to your team. For the Chiefs, I mean, not to get morbid, but the Chiefs have a running history of just awful tragedies happening to them, like the death of the player in the 90s. Right now, I wanted to say Derek Thomas, or the suicide of Jovan Belcher. They get a lot of bad things happen to the Chiefs. With the Vikings for a while, it was all about party boat and not good things that you would want your players doing off the field. Any memories of that kind of stuff?
I remember party boat. I think that was on Lake Minnetonka. It was just they're in trouble all the time. It's with Peterson, and either that or they're getting pulled over. And Harvin was kind of a troublemaker. Like Peterson got pulled over going way fast, and that seems like it always happens before this season. They're always in the news for something bad. Or like, EJ breaking his leg. Then I can't remember the guy's name that died at training camp.
Corey.
I keep thinking
Springer.
Yeah.
Randy Moss getting very emotional about that.
Randy Moss, and then him mooning the Packers. You remember that?
Yeah.
Mooning the Packers fans. Right?
I mean, yeah, Randy Moss. I mean, we can talk. We've talked about how good Randy Moss is, which is fair. He's one of the most phenomenal players. I mean, when I watch like Odell Beckham now, it's in that same vein where you just don't. It's about as often as between the time it took from Randy Moss to debut, Odell to debut, that you have such unique receivers that can do things that we had never seen before. But on the other hand, Randy Moss switched teams several times throughout his career because he is kind of a tough person to deal with.
Yep. I remember.
Did you have were there any stories or rumors, anybody that didn't like Randy Moss that you talked to during his time in Minnesota in terms of, because we do think of Minnesotans as, very, I think, nice, humble, quiet, do it the right way types of people. Are there issues with guys like Randy Moss?
I would assume my dad didn't like Randy Moss very much. Like, he liked the way he played. Like, my dad never liked Kevin Garnett because he was so aggressive, and like my dad wanted like that humility. He wanted that. I remember Randy Moss hearing about him going to his first Raiders like training camp or whatever, and he was driving his Vikings truck that he had painted in Vikings colors. But yeah, I don't think like people still, if you're a good enough player, people forgive you pretty easily, which is obviously that's kind of a thing throughout the league and America, and it's a little unfortunate sometimes in terms of like Michael Vick, and it's kind of like some of these people don't deserve it. But yeah, Randy Moss, him coming back, people forgot about all the bad things he did, and then he's still the same person. He was whining the whole time he was back. But I feel like he was justified in that because of Childress not really giving him the ball.
Yeah, I mean, Randy Moss is going to be up there in terms of the greatest Vikings of all time. It's not even a question. If I go through some of the career leaders for the Vikings, I mean, if quarterback, you want to go Fran Tarkenton. Running back, you're clearly going Adrian Peterson. Receiver, you're looking at Randy Moss for sure. Chris Carter, Hall of Famer. There's some great players there, but Adrian Peterson, we'll talk about him right now. The 7th overall pick in 2007 for Seahawks fans. That's the same year that 5 picks later Marshawn Lynch went. Something you don't see too often anymore, which is great running backs being drafted at the top of the draft. We've seen a lot of busts in terms of anyone that did take a risk on a running back in the last few years, which is not very many teams. As teams sort of move away from the Adrian Peterson, Marshawn Lynch type backs, guys that can catch the ball, move towards the passing game, block on third down, but the throwback being Adrian Peterson, who over his first 7 seasons in the NFL rushed for 10,115 yards, 86 touchdowns, averaging just over 1,400 rushing yards and 12 touchdowns per year from that time. And then he misses pretty much all of the 2014 season, comes back the next year and rushes for 1,485 yards and 11 touchdowns. Then he missed all of last year. And now the partnership between the Vikings and Adrian Peterson, when it almost ended with the child abuse charges a few years ago and he came back, that 2014 season is the one that he missed because of the child abuse charges. He comes back next year and becomes an all-pro, leading the NFL in rushing yards and rushing touchdowns. And now that time is gone. Luke, we just talked also about forgiving people for certain things. What was that like in 2014 when Peterson got suspended for the whole year, right off the back of the Ray Rice news, and then moving it into this child abuse charges?
that was tough. You know, he's like a state hero. You want them to all be good guys, and he like his personality. Everybody that I ever knew that meet him never had anything bad to say about him. He always seemed like a really good guy. I would hear on the radio all the time about people shaking his hand and him having like the hardest grip. They'd always say my hand hurt. I don't know if that was just like a running thing, which was weird. But yeah, it was not fun to hear. They showed the pictures of his son, and it's just like when you screw up and you do something wrong. Obviously, everyone. I don't know, man. It's a tough subject, you know.
Yeah.
Because you love them so, like the player so much, and you want the team to win. Obviously, you would love to have them, but there's repercussions, and I mean they're deserved, obviously.
Yeah, and now what do you think it's going to be like seeing him on the Saints and putting all your hope now into Dalvin Cook?
I'm excited to see the new team. I don't think Peterson. I'd be surprised if Peterson has much left in him. I mean, yeah. I'm not like rooting against him. The only real team I ever root against is the Packers. But also, I guess the Saints when they were hurting Favre on purpose. That was who was that? Sharp. He used to play for the Vikings, and he was like going for Favre, and they were paying him more money to hurt him, which was ridiculous. But yeah, Packers fans, because Minneapolis is like there's suburbs of Minneapolis inside Wisconsin, and having to deal with Packers fans, that's more of a thing that like if I'm rooting against someone, it wouldn't be against like a player that joins another team. It's more just always against the Packers.
How do you rank your passion right now for the three, or I guess for the professional sports teams in Minnesota, with the Twins and the I guess it's the Wild in the NHL. I don't follow the NHL. And the Wolves and the Vikings. How do you rank how much you follow those teams?
Well, you're forgetting about the Minnesota United, which is their new professional soccer team.
Okay, yeah, I did forget about that. In terms of I mean, I didn't know about it.
They're building a new stadium for them too right now. So everyone's getting new stadiums. The Target Center just got renovated for the Timberwolves, and they got new logos. But like for right now, I would say I'm paying attention mostly to the Timberwolves. There's a lot of exciting things going on. I've always been a huge Timberwolves fan, so I would say it's always been kind of a tie between them and the Vikings. But in terms of who I'm paying attention to more right now would be the Timberwolves, and then I'd say the Vikings, then the Wild, and then the Twins, because I'm not a huge baseball fan. But like if they're doing well, then I'd probably pay attention a little bit more. It's been a while. They lost like 106 games last year, so that was rough. They're playing a little bit better this year. And I'll go to games, but I never pay attention while I'm there. Like it's just more that baseball experience. So and then soccer. I've never watched one of those games before.
I know people in Seattle, they're very excited about the soccer team up there, the Sounders.
For real? No.
No, it's huge. I mean, they came in after I think I moved to LA. So, I mean, I was never a part of it, but I believe they've won MLS championships.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, people love it.
Well, then you're also forgetting about the Lynx, the Minnesota Lynx. The
WNBA?
They're like the best, man. They're like a dynasty. They have won 3 championships, I believe, like in the past 5 years or something. So they're our best. Wow. Yeah, there's one, I can't remember her name, but one of the players on there, she's the best in the league and very exciting to watch apparently. But it's also like, it's those games don't get a lot of people going to them. So even when I remember bartending downtown Minneapolis, and I remember like them winning and then having a parade for them winning, and we'd still we were really near the Target Center, but we still wouldn't get that much business because there wasn't that many people there. So that's unfortunate. You wish you would have more people rooting for teams that are winning, but
Brittany Griner.
Oh, that's her name?
I think so.
She just got.
Now she plays for the Phoenix Mercury.
Oh, she does? I feel like there's someone on.
Two-time Defensive Player of the Year, Sylvia Fowles.
Oh.
Maya Moore.
Can't remember.
Look, we're trying to help out the WNBA, give them some more
check them out.
Coverage.
The Sparks versus the Lynx. That's always a big match. LA Sparks versus Minnesota Lynx. That's also another thing. All the Minnesota sports teams are called Minnesota something.
Yeah.
Other than the city they're based in.
Yeah.
That's because there was originally St. Paul Saints and the Minneapolis Millers. That's actually what became the Twins. And people were fighting over St. Paul teams and Minneapolis teams to where people were murdering each other.
Wow.
So, yeah, because they were so close to each other, I guess it just was creating too much drama. So they decided all sports teams are going to be named Minnesota, whatever the name is, rather than Minneapolis Lakers, like they used to be the Minneapolis Lakers. So I don't like that. I don't like that because Minneapolis isn't as much of a household name as Seattle or I feel like that's legitimately one of the reasons fewer people have heard about Minneapolis, because there's no sports team called the Minneapolis Vikings or whatever.
I also I always had a personal, I don't know if I don't want to call it a problem, but just it's just weird to me. Minneapolis, Minnesota, they're too similar. And then sometimes, every time I say it, there's a tiny little 1% in the back of my brain that's going, wait a minute, is Minneapolis the state or the city? So it always flips around in my head.
That's frustrating. That's frustrating for me because I love Minneapolis. I want everybody to understand. It's Minneapolis, I think Minnesota and Minneapolis, that's Native American. That's what their names came from.
Uh-huh.
Minneapolis, Minnie means water and Appolis means city. So it stands for Water City. I'm not sure what Minnesota stands for. But, land of 10,000 lakes. So it's got to be a water state too. I think it's 11,000. It's got more coastline than California.
And then the T-Wolves, they're moving forward with Andrew Wiggins, Karl Anthony Towns, Jimmy Butler. That's what you're excited for next year.
Yeah, I'm bummed they got rid of Rubio. I was always a big Rubio fan. And, he played for the team for a very long time, seemed to really enjoy it. So it's always good to have players that really like the team. And he was super fun to watch. So him leaving was a bummer for me. I wanted him to stay. But I'm super psyched for the team. I remember I was in New York when that happened, when we got Butler. And that's all I could talk about.
Luke, thank you for talking about the Minnesota Vikings and the town of Minneapolis, the city. No disrespect, it's a full-on city. We should be honoring it more and talking about how they are the Minneapolis Vikings and the Minneapolis Twins and so forth, especially the Twins. Minneapolis Twins, it just makes most sense.
It's the 14th largest market, it's not a little town. So
exactly.
And it's, Twins make sense because it's Twins. The name Twins is from Twin Cities. So both of the states.
There it is.
But yeah, little history for you there.
Definitive proof that it is not a town.
No.
So the Seahawks and the Vikings play this Friday in the preseason week 2. We should be getting more of a look at the starters for both teams. Including Dalvin Cook for the Vikings going up against the Seahawks run defense, which was number 1 in the NFL last year. So that should be interesting to watch. We'll see the Seahawks offensive line try to hold up against Minnesota's defensive line, including Everson Griffin, some really Linval Joseph, some really strong players that we didn't quite get a chance to talk about today. Luke, if you wanted some of these Seattle sports fans and anyone else that happened to tune in today to find you somewhere online or something to promote, what do you got?
I'm on Instagram at Luke McDonough, LukeMcDonough. But I don't care if like Seattle fans follow me.
Well, I'm going to implore some of them to do it just as a thought experiment. Let's find out what happens when, some Seahawks fans follow a guy on Instagram that likes the Vikings.
There we go.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Guys, this is crazy. Social experiments. That's what this show's all about. That's it for this segment. Thanks for listening, and we will talk to you again soon.
Appreciate it, man. Thank you.